All right, guys, it is my turn to share a story with you, but I would love to hear a little bit about what you talked about. Can maybe a couple people just give me, what's something that comes naturally to you that you have found is maybe more difficult for other people? Dan said everything. I want all of you to know the weight of the hubris that Dan just said from the front row here. I love it. He is definitely the most humble person. That's a great one, talking to strangers. Some people, that comes really natural, right? It's second nature, being able to talk to strangers. And some people totally lock up, freeze up, or just don't know what to say or do. That's a great one. What else? Gardening. Yeah, okay. If you put me in a garden, don't expect results at all. Don't expect results. But you put you or Allison in a garden, wonders will be had. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. I don't have kids yet that are of this age. I've got a couple years. Renee does, so I'm wondering if she resonates with this. But recently, I had to teach someone how to drive. And when I was asked, so it was a neighbor of mine who's a Ukrainian who never took the time to learn, just didn't need to, and then now has a need to get his license. And he's working on getting his license. And he asked, will you teach me how to drive? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to teach you how to drive. And I didn't think about how difficult it is to teach another person how to drive a vehicle when it is so second nature to me. We'd get in the car and, he would, or what do I do now? It's like, okay, check this, and I guess check this, and check your mirrors, and move your seat to where it's comfortable, and the steering wheel looks a little too high. Move the steering wheel down. Okay, let's start backing up. Oh, before you back up, check the back right and back left and make sure nobody's coming. And there's all this checklist of things that in the course of 3 seconds, we all do. But someone who's never driven before is literally going down the list, the checklist of items. And it's difficult for someone to learn something when it's not second nature. And it's sometimes even harder. Allison and I talk all the time about maybe that dynamic about talking to new people and how do you teach someone to talk to new people. Some things that are second nature become more difficult to teach, but there are things that we all have that are second nature to us. And I think today's parable, I'll read this parable for us. I think there's a dynamic of something that maybe should be second nature. And if we press, there's a lot of things that are second nature. Sometimes things maybe shouldn't be second nature that are. It is what it is. But I think this passage hits on something that maybe should be. So let me do this. I'm going to read the parable. This is the parable of the persistent widow. If you've got your phones and want to pull it out, that's great. It's Luke 18. But if you don't, I'll read it maybe twice for us. And we'll go from there. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me. That's his reason. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? So you've got this judge who is described as unjust and maybe even unfit to hold that office of judge. And this judge ends up granting this widow her plea purely because she's annoyed, or he's annoyed, right? She keeps pestering. He finally says, yes, I'll give this. And God says, how much more will a God who loves you give you something that you petition for? And he says this thing, which I think is really interesting, that you petition for day and night, which I think is an interesting choice. Will he find faith on the earth when he comes back? Turn in the same groups that you were talking about for that first question, and just talk about what stands out to you. I'll give you a couple minutes, and then we'll talk as a large group. What stands out to you in that passage? All right. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the passage. You just feel free to shout it out. What stands out to you here?
Well, see, that's one of the things I learned as I got older. Don't lose your temper because it gets you in trouble.
Don't lose your temper because it gets you in trouble. All right. There it is. You heard it here first, folks.
Is this how directly the parable was about prayer? Sometimes parables are like,
What's it about?
what the heck is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, he's a little more direct at the end of this. Yeah, I like that too. Makes it much easier for me reading it. What else?
We were wondering about this widow since he's so afraid that he's going to get attacked.
What reputation does this widow have? And what is really happening when she's being persistent? This is a great question. Probably not the core point of the parable, but it is made for TV. I would love to know.
I thought about the times where I maybe didn't have as much desire when I'm praying for somebody to know Jesus.
Yeah.
And like this person, when you really desire something, you keep asking for it. There's obviously something that's driving you to action versus me praying, hey, I hope this person finds Jesus a few times
And then calling it quits. Yeah, it's like, that's good. I feel good about that. There's something connected here between belief and action. There's a connection here between the belief that someone has and what it causes them to do. There's two things. There's lots in here. We don't have that much time. There's two things that really stand out to me. One is the widow's inherent view of the judge. And two is how that view influences her actions. One is the widow's inherent view of the judge, and the second is how that view influences her actions. The widow's petition to the judge is not a shot in the dark. It's not a random wish on the wind, hoping that it gets answered. She petitions the judge because she understands that the judge is the answer to her problem. In Jewish culture, widows were afforded special protections under Jewish law and culturally. In Deuteronomy 24:17, it says, "You shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or the fatherless, or take the widow's garment in pledge. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this." And then it goes on to explain all the ways that orphans and widows should be protected, both culturally and systematically in their culture. The widow goes to the judge because she knows that the judge can and should solve her problem. That the judge can and should solve her problem. He is the primary solution. He is her hope. She looks to the judge to act because of a deep-seated belief on what the judge can and should do. It's action from belief. I have 4 kids. He's not here, but my second is Daniel. And when he was 4, him and I took a trip to the mall, random trip to the mall. I don't remember why, it doesn't really matter. But we were in the mall. He was 4, he had a bunch of energy. And he looked up, and I was holding his hand here on the right. And he looked up and he said, "Daddy, can we skip?" And I said, "Of course we can skip, honey. Let's skip." Now, there's a bunch of people in the mall, and this is main thoroughfare. But I was like, I don't care what people think of us. Let's skip. And so we started skipping. And it was kind of like this TV moment where it kind of snaps back and forth between us. He's looking up at me laughing. And I'm looking down at him. Yeah, it's a lots of joy, snap back and forth. And then boom, Daniel runs right into a glass door that had been opened from the outside and lays him out flat on the floor. Now, I look up. A lot of people are watching. And it was very loud noise. I look to see, like, what's, is he okay? I look down at him, look at other people. It caused a commotion. I look down at Daniel, and Daniel doesn't look at any of those people. He doesn't look at anybody. He looks at me. He locks eyes with me, and there's this moment. It's like a decision moment. that he knows that I'm the person that can define this situation for him. I'm the one who can do that. I've done it for him before, and I can do it again. And he's waiting. Now, some parents, and this would not be a poor response, would run up to their child and hug them and say, "Are you okay? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh." I am not that parent, but there's nothing wrong with that response. I know many who would give that response. I looked at Daniel and I started laughing. And so did he. So he starts laughing and I start laughing and I scoop him up and we go on our way holding hands. Daniel knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that I can solve his problems. He knows that. I can help shape the view of the world around him and the situation in front of him in that moment. And that belief leads to his actions in that moment. Eyes locked, laughter shared. And there's an example with the widow and of this little 4-year-old of the expectations Jesus has for us. We can petition day and night for justice in the world around us and in our own lives. We can't do that if we don't first hold the core and fundamental belief that Jesus is Lord, that he is the hope who can make all things right. He's the one who can bring justice to a broken and hurting world, and he can solve the problems that are right in front of us. On a maybe inverse to Daniel, I work for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I work for the national office now, but I used to be in the field, so there was lots of moments where I would prep talks to give to students or on Sunday mornings. And our church community had a building that was a massive warehouse. And I would go in, I had this one talk to give on Sunday morning, and obviously, true to form, I went to write it on Saturday. So I go into the building on Saturday. I knew nobody was there. So I go in, I lock the door behind me, and I go in to write this talk. Now, I'm an external processor. If you ever talk to me on the phone, you can almost bet that when I'm talking, I'm walking, and if I'm trying to figure something out, I'll talk to myself. I have no shame about that at all. I will talk it out if no one else will talk it out with me. So I was in this building, knowing nobody was there, walking around the building, preaching to nobody as I worked out these points. Now, one of the cool features of this building is there was little scooters that get you from point A to point B because it was big enough. So we had these little razor scooters. You need to go to the bathroom, just take your little razor scooter and go to the bathroom and then come back. I, in this moment, had opened these like doors and I had this big loop and I was on this scooter in this warehouse, preaching to nobody, going on this scooter. And I was in this moment, kind of in my headspace, feeling good about this like idea that I was fleshing out to myself and nobody else. And there was this door threshold that really required you to lift up on the wheel just a little bit. And I was not thinking at all. So the wheel hits the front of this threshold, buckles to the side, and I go flying over the handlebars. Now, what felt like a 20-yard skid, which was probably 6 inches to a foot, but I laying there totally embarrassed. And what's the first thing that I do? I look up to see if anyone saw. I looked up to figure out if there was a different way or a certain way that I should define the situation, or how embarrassed should I be depending on who saw me. There was nobody in this building. It was completely empty. And I still looked up, second nature, to try to figure out how to define that situation. You see, I'm no longer like Daniel, as he was at 4. You see, Daniel even isn't like Daniel. He's 12 now, and he's more competent. He has more experiences, and he can solve a lot of his own problems. My job as a father is not to keep him reliant on me, but to teach him to be reliant on God, for God to be his go-to, his first. The day and night consistent petitioning of God in this passage is based on the belief that God can act, that he can fix things. But it's the exercise and consistency of the petition that reinforces the belief that we should go to God first, the belief that he could do it. The more we do something, the more it becomes second nature, and the more we do it as a natural response. If you're on the road and you constantly flick people off that is your natural response. It will become your natural response. If someone cuts you off and you bless people, the more you bless people on the road, the more that becomes your natural response. We get natural at things because we do them on a regular basis. And explaining driving to my neighbor wasn't easy because it was natural for me. It's just something that I do. I choose to drive from point A to point B, and I don't think about it. The downside, among many, to growing in competence and shrinking in reliance on God is we end up with far less chances to make petitioning God our second nature. As we close, I want to encourage us to reflect a little bit on how we've allowed our own competence, our experiences, to take the place of a, we'll call it a God-first mindset. So let me leave you with two questions to talk about at your table. In what ways have we forgotten that God can impact our lives? That God actually can impact our lives? Because that belief leads to action. And if I'm honest, there is a deficit of prayerful petitioning and action. But if you asked me cognitively, I would say absolutely I believe God can do that thing. I absolutely believe that if you ask God, he could come, and I've seen him come in profound ways, over and over and over again. But it hasn't led to action, at least most recently in my life. So in what ways have we forgotten that God can impact our lives and that God can be our first go-to to solving a problem? And what actions can we do this week to grow in faithful petitioning to God? What actions can we do this week to grow in faithful petitioning to God? Amen? Take some time in your groups and just talk about those ideas.